A group of bikers pulls up to a small-town diner, their roaring engines and leather jackets turning heads. Among them, one man spots a teenager sitting alone by the window, quietly eating a simple meal. His worn-out clothes and downcast eyes make him an easy target. With a smirk, the biker makes a snide comment loud enough for everyone to hear. The others laugh, egging him on as the boy tries to ignore the mocking words. But what happens next stuns the entire room. This isn't just a story about a teenager facing cruel taunts. It's about standing up for yourself in the most unexpected way. Just when the gang thinks they've had their fun, the boy makes a bold move that leaves them speechless. What could a quiet, unassuming teen possibly do to turn the tables? Stick around, because this is a moment no one saw coming. The diner fell silent as the boy slowly stood up, his chair scraping the floor. He wasn't tall or particularly strong-looking, but there was something in his eyes, determination, maybe even defiance. The bikers exchanged amused glances, clearly not expecting much. One of them leaned back in his chair, smirking. "What's the matter, kid? Can't take a joke." The boy hesitated, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He glanced around the room, seeing curious faces watching, waiting for his reaction. The waitress, an older woman with kind eyes, nervously stepped forward, trying to diffuse the tension. "Let's keep it peaceful here, folks," she said softly. But the boy wasn't backing down. Taking a deep breath, he met the gang leader's gaze and said, "You think you're tough, don't you? Let me show you something real." His voice was steady, but what he did next would change everything. The gang leader raised an eyebrow, clearly amused, as the boy stepped forward. "Oh, this I gotta see," he chuckled, leaning back in his seat. The other bikers joined in, their laughter filling the room. But the boy didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, holding it tightly in his hand. His knuckles were white, but his expression was calm. The crowd in the diner watched in stunned silence, unsure of what was happening. The waitress stood frozen, her hands gripping her tray, as if bracing for the worst. One of the bikers sneered, "What's that, a love letter? You gonna read us a bedtime story?" But the boy ignored him. Slowly, he unfolded the paper, revealing a faded certificate. "This," he said firmly, his voice unwavering, "is what I've done with my life. What have you done with yours?" The room grew even quieter, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. The bikers' laughter faded, replaced with confused glances. No one saw what was coming next. The leader of the gang leaned forward now, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked, his tone no longer mocking but sharp, almost challenging. The boy's hands trembled slightly as he held up the certificate for everyone to see. "This is proof that I've done something meaningful. I worked harder than anyone thought I could, and I'm not afraid to stand up to people like you." The bikers shifted in their seats, their bravado faltering under the weight of the boy's steady gaze. The leader snorted, trying to mask his unease. "You think a piece of paper makes you better than us," he said, his voice louder now, as if he were trying to regain control of the situation. But the boy didn't back down. He stepped closer, his voice calm but cutting. "It's not about being better. It's about having the courage to face challenges without tearing others down. Can any of you say the same?" The air was charged, the tension thick. Every eye in the diner was locked on them, waiting for what would happen next. No one dared to speak, the weight of the moment pressing down like a storm about to break. The gang leader's smirk faltered as he glanced at his crew, silently daring them to laugh. But none of them did. The boy stood his ground, holding that certificate like a shield. "What's the big deal, kid?" One of the younger bikers finally muttered, trying to break the tension. "It's just some paper." The boy turned his gaze toward him, his voice calm but cutting. "It's not just paper, it's my GED. It's proof that no matter how much life knocked me down, I kept going. It's more than you'll ever understand if all you know is tearing people down to feel bigger." For a moment, it seemed like the leader was about to brush it off, but something in his eyes shifted. The boy's words hit harder than anyone expected. Before anyone could react, the sound of heavy boots echoed from the back of the diner. A man who had been quietly observing the scene now stepped forward, his broad shoulders and confident stride drawing everyone's attention. "All right," the man said, his voice low but commanding. "That's enough." He wasn't just a random customer, his badge glinted under the fluorescent lights. "Let's hear what else this young man has to say." The gang leader froze, the sudden twist catching him off guard. The stakes had just been raised, and everyone in the room knew this confrontation was far from over. The room felt frozen as the officer's presence shifted the entire dynamic. The bikers, who had thrived on intimidation moments earlier, now looked uneasy. The leader's confident facade cracked as he turned to the officer. "We weren't doing anything wrong," he muttered defensively. The officer raised an eyebrow. "It didn't sound that way from back there," he said, glancing at the boy. "You've got something to say, kid. I think everyone here could use a lesson in respect." The boy hesitated but then stepped forward, his voice steady. "You act tough, but real strength is lifting others up, not tearing them down. I don't care if you don't respect me, but you'll never make me feel small again." He turned to the leader. "You can mock all you want, but this," he said, holding up his certificate, "is proof that I'm going places. Where are you going?" The gang leader opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the officer spoke. "That's enough. Time for you boys to head out." Reluctantly, the bikers got up, their swagger gone. But just as the leader walked past the boy, he paused. For a moment, it seemed like he might say something cruel, but instead, he muttered under his breath, "You've got guts, kid. Don't waste it." As the gang rode away, the boy sat back down, the room buzzing with quiet admiration. But the final twist came when the officer leaned in and said, "Keep pushing forward. You've got more people rooting for you than you think." The boy smiled, realizing that courage isn't just about standing up to others. It's about believing in yourself, no matter who's watching. As the rumble of the motorcycles faded into the distance, the diner slowly returned to life. The waitress approached the boy with a warm smile and set a fresh piece of pie in front of him. "On the house," she said, "for reminding all of us what real strength looks like." The boy nodded his thanks, the tension in his shoulders finally easing. Around the room, a few customers murmured quiet words of encouragement, and for the first time in a long while, he felt seen, not for what he lacked, but for the determination he carried. Before leaving, the officer placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Keep proving them wrong," he said, a small but genuine smile on his face. The boy watched him go, then glanced at his certificate one more time. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a symbol of his resilience, and this was just the beginning.